welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'll be your host for this conversation. Today, I'm glad to welcome Mathew Schulz. Mathew is the founder of matchat, an accelerator for career-minded procurement professionals, something we should all be. So, hi, Mathew, how are you?
How's it going, Kelly? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I know. And in fact, you and I, even though it's November, as we're chatting, we were just
Yeah,
talking about the glorious warm weather that we're having. So after we have the conversation, we'll have to go outside and soak in some rays of sun. But it's
I was
it's always a good day to talk about procurement.
I was gonna say you'll catch me outside for a walk for sure. It's actually pretty nice, and here we are wearing vests, but you could
I
really be in shorts.
I know. I know. That's so funny. So before we get into talking about procurement's engagement and professional
Yeah.
development, tell us a little bit more about you. What's your professional background and what brought you to procurement?
Yeah, of course. I think the question often gets asked, and I think I posted something on LinkedIn a couple of days ago about whether or not procurement chooses you or you choose
Yep.
it. I actually chose procurement by way of my experience and background. Like I was in the military, then I went to school, I did a little bit of economics and landed in the public sector where I was trying to do technology implementation. So procurement got involved. And then I jumped into the private sector and I was like, gosh, if you ever want to buy anything, you've got to go to procurement. And I was like, what? Like, what are they? They're always here. What are they doing? And when I learned exactly what it was, I just got so interested in it. I think it allowed me to get both my left and right brain working, a little bit of
Yes.
creativity, a little bit of the art of procurement, pun
Oh, good
intended.
one. There you go. I wish I had a bell to
And
ring. We'd get points
yeah,
for that.
and the science part, right? There's like a
Yeah.
bunch of data and information. It's inevitable. So I really liked it. I did choose it, and I've had a very non-linear path in terms of how I got here. Again, it was like a little bit of project management, technology implementations, then standing up procurement functions at
Yeah.
PE-backed firms, and I've loved it ever since. It's a really great profession, and wow, is it evolving.
Big time. It's been a time of huge change. And all right, so people can write in or comment if they have other thoughts about this. I think a lot of people took a journey very much like yours into procurement, right? That sort of
Yeah,
non-linear, discovering it along the way. And
yeah.
yet I feel like you don't tend to hear people walking around saying, I just love working in finance. I just love working in operations. But procurement, maybe it is that art plus science tends to
Yeah.
evoke a passion from people. So
Mhm.
nobody necessarily sets out looking for it, but once they find it, they're sort of hooked. What is
Yeah.
it specifically you would say that you love about procurement?
Gosh, I agree. There's some kind of calling. I don't know what it was. For me, it was this idea of, yeah, I feel like you just have this view into the business like nobody else. And that was super, super special to me. I really love this idea of, well, I think by nature I'm pretty curious and I like to ask a lot of questions and I love learning. And I realized that this was a place I could do it day in and day out.
Yeah.
And I think to answer your question more directly, you're dealing with people all day long and everybody in the business, everybody outside of the business, all your external
True.
vendors and suppliers. And it really was just this perfect place for me. It really fit my past experiences and the things that I just generally like to do.
Now, it's interesting you talk about sort of working with people because I will agree with you. People are the best part about procurement. People are the best part about everything in general. They're so fascinating and unpredictable and do such wild and crazy things.
Yeah.
But most of the time, we talk about tech. So, given how important tech is to procurement, but also how important people are to procurement, do you think we get overly focused on the technology when we get into serious conversations? Do we need to give more time and thought and energy to the people side?
Wow, interesting question. I think it's really, really hard to ignore, especially modern technology. I mean, look at what's happened in the past 4, 5, 6 years. You've had this massive influx of modern tools, which is great. There's a lot of venture capitalist money getting put
Yep.
into the space. And so you've got these new companies popping up, things like intake and orchestration. It's an entirely new new platform. And I think they're all very, very helpful. The way in which I love to think about it is if we can marry that with these, what I've tried to coin as next generation procurement
Sure.
professionals, you've really got that secret sauce, the thing that I think businesses have been looking for and or need to have a truly magnificent procurement function. And so, yes, we talk about technology quite a bit, but I find it to be so, so helpful because when you're automating these mundane tasks or a lot of the administrative work that we've just been
Yeah.
doing for so long, gosh, I mean, even like paper based processes, they still exist.
Yeah, they
I
do.
love, they do. I love the fact that we're thinking about using tools to automate that, to make it easier so that we can focus more on the people. And I like the narrative of helping people out by using modern technology. But I think it's gosh, what have we said before? It's like very transactional and now it's transformational, or it was confrontational and now it's collaborative. Like I
Yeah.
agree. I love that. I think that's where we're headed. I hope
Yeah.
that's where we're headed.
Well, and it's interesting because when you were talking about the last period of years and you said 5 or 6 years, my brain automatically filled in year or 2 because
Yeah.
we're so conditioned to think about
Oh,
AI and generative AI. And
yeah.
and it's interesting because that has been critical and it has transformed procurement in unbelievable and exciting ways. But maybe
Yeah.
this is back to that art and science of the field that
Yeah.
sure, for the last couple of years, the whole world has been swept up in the AI craze. Not that AI in and of itself is necessarily new, but in terms of applications,
Yep.
but procurement's been on this technical evolution for 20, 30 years if you really, really, really go back to
Yeah.
the beginning. And
Yeah.
so while everybody else is sort of joining us for this leg of the journey, we
Right.
never stop evolving when it comes to technology. You're absolutely right to call out sort of that 5, 6 years that really AI has just kind of come into the tail end of to start
Yeah.
either changing the way we interact with systems or even picking up the pace of innovation.
I love that you bring that up because, like you, gosh, who hasn't noticed AI, right? Whether it's the procurement technology or fintech companies
Yep.
marketing it, or just our general use. I try to be a daily user for sure because I want to stay relevant and use the technology that will be here for the future. But I can remember just a short 5 years ago using a no code platform to build out, which was essentially an intake orchestration tool to
Okay.
bring in renewals or things like this. And it's like, oh, for me, that was kind of a turning point. And, to your point, if you go back to the history buffs will know that 15, 20 years ago, we had some of these tools. And in
Yeah.
fact, gosh, I think it was Pierre over at Spend Matters who had mentioned guided buying, right? That was his idea of intake many, many years ago. Shout out to the OG. Which was fascinating to think about that we've had fits and starts with it, but for some reason there just seems to be some momentum here.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about people and we've talked about
Yeah.
systems, but none of this is
Yeah.
complete without talking about data and information that our systems
Oh,
either create, collect, standardize, analyze. What
yeah.
sort of an opportunity does that data present as an additional opportunity for procurement?
I I love this question because I've had a lot of success using those modern tools to capture data and information in unique and different ways. I think in the past we were really reliant on like IT teams to help us out, set up
Yeah.
functions or rather set up technology tools. It's not always the case now. It's much easier, much quicker and faster. And when you've done a great job of aggregating or collecting all of this data and information. Wow, is that useful, especially if you can then share that information in a way that resonates with your stakeholders. I can remember being even at Forrester, speaking with the C-suite before I took the job, right? This was like part of my interview. I was like, I'd like to speak with more folks in the C-suite, which
Yeah.
may have been unique or unusual, but I really wanted to get a sense of how they thought about it because I knew once we got our hands on data and information, what we could do with it. And it was telling
Absolutely.
stories in ways that then helped them literally get the goods and services they need to do their job and their team's job much better, which then helped us grow the organization. And it was so, so helpful. And I think to go back to your question, that's where the power is on data and information. And if we can harness that in new ways, gosh, like again, procurement, like such a great
Absolutely.
place to be right now.
Yeah. And I think the best thing about that opportunity, you talked about stories, right? So
Yeah.
it's very easy to have a massive cumbersome spreadsheet or look
Oof.
at this
Yeah.
database we have, and people look at it and they're like, I mean, it's almost equivalent of like that charming junk drawer everybody has in
Oh
their
God.
kitchen someplace.
Guilty, Kelly. Guilty.
Everything useful in the world is in there, but good luck finding it. If you see
Yeah.
it and you need it a week later, you will never find it again. And so it
Yeah.
does become procurement's ability to kind of back to our point about art and science, connect that, okay, we
Mhm.
understand the analytics, we understand the business objectives. We're willing to get our hands dirty working in that data. But the
Mhm.
only way you're going to get decision makers at any level, especially when it comes to something strategic, to
Mhm.
engage is about telling that story, painting a picture. What do we have the opportunity to do? Do you
Yes.
think that remains sort of the unique human magic that's going to not just save our jobs from impending robot
Sure.
doom, but also sort of continue to open new doors for us into the future?
Yeah. I do, and you there were so many good nuggets there. I think this idea of storytelling, like, right, you can think of the technology that will you'll create this amazing, beautiful dashboard or these great reports, which is super helpful, but I still need to articulate a story behind it.
Yeah.
What does it mean? What is the business context behind all of those numbers? I think finance has historically been very numbers focused. Okay, I can appreciate that.
Thank
However, when
goodness.
you
Yeah.
yeah. However, when you add business context to it, wow, that story really comes to life. And you then don't just need to focus on cost savings. Oh, we've saved $1 million this quarter.
Yeah.
Okay. Not only did we save $1 million, but we renewed 3 tools, bought 2 new sales or marketing tools that are here to generate ROI. And again, you then catch the ear of the C-suite because you're speaking their language. Like, how are we driving revenue? How are we creating growth for the organization? And
Yeah.
it goes back to being able to articulate and tell those stories in a new and unique way. And I think with those dashboards, with the new information, the types of reporting we can do now, gosh, and AI, like it makes it easier to do.
Yeah.
The component for me remains. I want somebody to tell me that story. Human history has told us we've been doing stories since
That's
day
right.
one. And that's so important. I mean, gosh, podcasts exist for a reason because we've got humans talking. And if you'll
Right.
notice, we're on video for a purpose. It used to just be audio, but you throw this on YouTube, everyone's paying attention to Kelly and Matt. Like,
That's
oh,
right.
what is going on? And so I think if you can do that, think through how you're doing procurement in a new, next gen, different way. That's it. And it's marrying people and modern technology to do it differently.
Yeah. Now, here's something else that's really interesting that I feel like we've seen start to change.
Yeah.
It wasn't so long ago that procurement was still dominated by this mindset of knowledge is power. And so, therefore, if I comment on someone's LinkedIn post, I'm clearly giving away the keys to the kingdom in terms of how my
Yeah.
company manages spend and suppliers. And so, I'm just going to maybe I'll click a thumbs up like once every 6 months. But other than that, engagement is a no go. It's I read it.
Yeah.
I might tell someone I read it, but I'm not going to leave any trail behind.
Yeah.
You're someone that's a very effective connector, someone that's constantly sharing your
Sure.
perspective, your insights, even information on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. How is it that you decide what to post about or what details to share with your online network?
Uh, I think I think I'm probably writing to myself and or the people that are just a few years behind or 3 5 10 years behind. I would have loved to have seen or heard or watched
Yeah.
somebody do this. It would have helped me. And I think, ugh, guilty. I'm from Wisconsin originally, Midwest manners included. Hello, thank you, hi to everybody. And I love this idea of sharing, right? Like I
Yeah.
said, lifelong learner, I mean it. I want to share all of this information with as many people as possible because if you believe in this like abundance mindset, you're here to help everybody. And that will then be advantageous for them. They'll probably get promoted faster, they'll get recognized, they'll get
Yeah.
awards. And I think that's super, super helpful. And I love the idea of giving back. So, in choosing what to write or what not to write, I'd rather just share what I know, give it all away. And hopefully, because it's one thing to say it, I believe it's another thing to then execute on it. So maybe
True.
that's part of it. But then I hope that folks are interested in doing it or try. And while not everybody wants to comment on LinkedIn or maybe they'll do a thumbs up here and there, my direct messages, like my DMs, are exploding because that's where they want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, there's something here. People, this resonates with people. And gosh, I also just love doing it.
Yeah. And of course, I mean,
Yeah.
that's ultimately what makes it successful. You can always tell when someone is doing something that they truly enjoy. It comes
Yeah.
through with, I don't know, just a tone. You can feel that this was not a task and like, okay, the next thing I have to do is post on
Yeah.
LinkedIn and then I can cross that off. If you
Yeah,
look
that doesn't work.
forward to that opportunity to
Yeah.
reflect, oh, I saw a cool article, I want to share about that.
Right.
Um, do you typically, whether it's in the comments or in the DMs
Yeah.
that you receive, do you
Yeah.
usually get a pretty quick sense about what piece of what you shared is resonating with the people that are reading it and following along?
Yeah. Well, great way to think about it. I think it's probably just so inherent that I do want to be extremely thorough. Well, I shouldn't say extremely, as thorough as possible in responding to somebody because I think, gosh, if they're spending the time to comment on this, like,
Yes.
this is a conversation. It's just happening online in written word as opposed to in person or on a podcast. Um, there is something about this almost like immediate feedback loop, however, right? It's like, oh, you write the thing and a lot of people are interested in it. And you go, oh, okay, that's very topical. People are paying attention to that. But then again, like anyone will say, there's, of course, like it's a rented audience and it's on a platform with an algorithm, and that's inevitable. And people are like, should you do this or do that? Um, I said a long time ago, and I hope this comes through. I'm glad you said it. Like there's some authenticity. There's a tone that goes
Yeah.
with it where it's like, I'm probably not writing for the algorithm. I'm writing for the audience because it's so easy to tell the things that they're enjoying or want to talk about because I also want to talk about them.
Yeah.
Like guilty, selfishly, I get something out of this too, right? Like to know that the things we're thinking about and saying resonates with other people, ugh, that makes me feel good. I love it.
Yeah. Plus, I do think if you, let's say you could figure out the algorithm, to live
Yeah.
and die by an algorithm is a very risky thing. And I
Yeah,
certainly know from the work that I've done with LinkedIn and some of the different creator
totally.
programs, they are
Yeah.
constantly trying to adjust that algorithm so that
Yeah.
people can't create to it. It's
Right.
interesting how much in common a platform like LinkedIn has with what we're trying to do in procurement. We're saying,
Totally.
okay, tech is important if we're going to achieve scale and consistency, but we don't want tech to sort of rule the day. We want the
Yep.
people to be able to bring their side of things into it. I'm curious, Matthew, what the general sort of frame of mind is right now. So it's early November. You and I joked about the
Yeah.
weather.
Yeah.
We know today the world's eyes are sort of on the US. We're watching the
Yeah.
election.
Get out and
Um,
vote.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we hope you got out and voted 2 weeks
Yeah,
ago,
yeah.
depending on when
Where's
this
my
runs.
sticker?
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh.
But a lot of the frame of mind has been sort of focused on today. But what do you think the general outlook is? I mean, is it
Yeah.
positive? Is it negative? Are people excited about next year? Are they anxious?
Yeah.
What would you say the general temperature in the room is for procurement and supply chain?
It's really funny you ask that. I don't know where I came up with this narrative in my head, but so at Forrester, I decided to start talking out loud on LinkedIn. It probably changed my life in some way, shape, or form. And I was like, oh, like I've got a finger on the pulse here. Like this is great. Then you have all these folks that are reaching out and more conversations and carving out time to have those
Yeah,
talks. And then I think even within the past 6 months, having been part of a procurement technology company and now getting involved with a larger digital community, and it's kind of like, whoa, can really sense and feel what's going on.
Yeah.
almost like Matrix style, seeing ones and zeros.
Oh, not the kicking
Um,
part in the air, the sort of
no,
seeing the
no.
data.
Well,
Just
maybe. Gosh, if I could do that, yeah. What a Halloween trick.
yeah.
I think you've got general excitement, right? I talk about this idea as more of it's much more than a community. There's literally a movement
Yeah.
happening right now. And I would say it's gaining momentum. Think about the new events and conferences that have come about, the new people in the space, whether that's founders on technology or just some of the new voices, the younger generation coming
Absolutely.
and speaking out. And so I think there's just general excitement. People are interested. Do we always know where we're headed? No, not necessarily. And there are things like macroeconomic climate to take into consideration. But I think the way in which I've been saying it, and I try not, it's hard for me not to be thinking about 3 years, 36 months down the road, because it's like, oh, that'll change quick.
Yeah.
Or I'll make some kind of statement and it's like, wow, that happened a lot faster than I expected. Even within just, let's call it the next 6 months, right? The end of Q4 and the beginning of Q1 of 2025. One, procurement's heads down doing some work right now. We
Oh,
know the
big
end of the
time.
fiscal year, you've got a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
However, there's a sense of thinking about budgets and what next year looks like. So is that I'm adopting new technologies, or what's going to happen? Is there going to be some consolidation? So with the excitement, a little bit of maybe uncertainty. I've heard it a few times, especially in just face-to-face conversations where people feel a little more comfortable sharing that. But I don't think it's bad. I think it's generally good. Again, uh, all of this wouldn't be happening if something wasn't going on.
That's true. No,
Yeah.
and there's always interest for procurement systems, procurement data.
Yep.
It seems like every day, especially as part of the supply chain, procurement is front section of the paper, if
It
not
is
above the fold. Those are the
household.
craziest days. And even in changing regulations, you can
Oh,
read
yeah,
most of them and think, okay, not to be selfish, but how is this going to affect us? What opportunity does this create for us to apply what we're already so good at to
totally,
something that the company's going to have to deal with? It is such an
totally.
exciting time to be in the field.
It really is, and I love some of the content that you put out because you do such a good job of these deep dives on, again, a top of fold headline or what has happened in the space, and I think that's equally as important, right? To understand something at a little more of a granular spec instead of, sometimes it can feel like, oh, that a post on LinkedIn can
Yeah,
just be motivational, right? It's okay, great, or entertaining, but you really get into an educational part, which I think is equally as important because it should be, or I certainly hope it is, part of our job to understand that so
yeah.
that we can then help the rest of the organization. And so it is maintaining a little bit of an eye on the macroeconomic climate, some of the supply chain issues, or just general politics and economics. It's important. It's probably part of it. If it's not now, it certainly will be more in the future.
Absolutely. And this goes back
Yeah,
to your early point about being curious, right?
totally.
Reading an article that could have very high level information about inflation or
Sure.
corporate tax rates or
Sure.
a regulation that none of us can say because it's in German, but we know it's really important. Going, okay, I think this is something I need to understand,
Yeah,
and taking the time and going to dig in and get enough information to then
totally.
bring it into conversations or go find an expert and say, hey, expert in this part of the
Yes.
business, could you
Yep.
spend 15 minutes with me? People tend to be so incredibly generous
Of
even when
course.
you haven't met in person and you just reach out to someone on LinkedIn.
Yep.
I don't know if you've had the same experience. I found people to be so gracious and friendly and giving of their time, and
Yep.
in most cases, grateful that someone asked.
I agree. And to think about, here's something super advantageous about social media, especially LinkedIn. The network is now extremely global. Not that it hadn't been
Yes,
before, but to get a DM from somebody on the other side of the world, oh my gosh, right?
it's so
And
cool.
then to find a way to figure out how with the 12-hour difference you're going to meet, right? It's like, okay, if I get on the phone at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's 7 a.m. for you the next day. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
I
That's so
know.
cool. So powerful too.
I know. Those conversations, I think for me, it usually happens with Australia where you're talking to somebody and
That's
it's
exactly, yeah.
tomorrow. And you're like, so how is tomorrow? Like, just
Yeah,
give
yeah,
me like the early look. Is tomorrow shaping up to be a good day or a bad day?
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, Now, Matthew, we always like to sort of round these conversations out with a piece of advice. We actually call it sharing the love, very on brand.
Yeah, really.
Whether it's something in procurement, whether it's something around tech, whether it's something around social media and building a more engaged network, is there a piece of advice or a final thought that you'd like to leave everybody with?
This really is feeling the love.
I know
Well,
exactly. This is the paying it forward part of our
yeah.
conversation.
Like you, I'll stick to my personal brand, which is heavily weighted on people and feeling comfortable and supported
Yeah.
to then share your voice. I find that so empowering. And I love to see new content creators or people feeling comfortable putting a comment or starting conversations they wouldn't normally have, dropping in a DM to ask if somebody will meet, jump on a Zoom call. I find those so refreshing and so exciting. I always learn something. I hope somebody else does too. And I think we're so interconnected. It's
Oh,
such a
yeah.
great way to find those connections and build your network.
So I'm going to go way out on a limb and assume that if somebody's meeting you for the first time through this conversation, that the best
Yeah.
thing for them to do is reach out and to connect with you on LinkedIn.
DMs are always open. It takes me a while to get through them, but please, yeah. Yeah, that's very nice of you. Thank you.
And if you do reach out to Matthew, make sure you tell him you saw him or heard him here on the Love Procurement podcast. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.